Don't steal your sister's thunder, my parents warned. At her wedding I revealed my secret wedding they had missed. Their smiles collapsed instantly. My name is Clara, and here is the story of how I finally got back at the individuals who had been making me feel inferior for years. Growing up as the Mitchell family's younger daughter meant living in the shadow of my older sister Elise. She was 4 years older, naturally gorgeous, incredibly popular, and according to my parents, flawless in every aspect. I was the awkward one with frizzy hair, braces that lasted too long, and a preference for books over partying. My parents, Marianne and Victor Mitchell, never tried to hide their preference. Elise received a new automobile for her 16th birthday, whilst I received a lecture about responsibility when I requested driving lessons. She got a full ride to her desired college, but I worked 2 jobs to pay for community college. When Elise announced her engagement to her college boyfriend Adiran, my parents promptly offered to cover the entire wedding expenses. When I proposed dating someone seriously, my mother would make passive-aggressive comments about how I should first improve myself. After 24 years of being treated as the less important daughter, I reached my breaking point when I met Daniel Moreau, a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital downtown. He was nice and witty, and he recognized something in me that my family evidently never did. We fell in love fast and deeply. After 16 months of dating, Daniel proposed on a romantic weekend retreat to the mountains. It wasn't spectacular or Instagrammable. It was just the 2 of us, a stunning sunset, and the most emotional proposal I could have imagined. When I called my parents to tell them the news, their reaction was, to say the least, lackluster. "Oh, honey, that's nice," my mother responded, her voice clearly distracted. "Are you sure you're ready for marriage though? You're still figuring out your career and, well, you know how these things can be." My father responded even worse. "Maybe you should wait until Elise's wedding is over. We don't want to steal her thunder, do we?" Steal her thunder. Elise's wedding was still 8 months away, but this was typical of my parents. Everything revolved around Elise and her idyllic existence. The months before Elise's wedding were a nightmare. Every family event turned into an Elise appreciation session. My mother would spend hours showing me Pinterest boards of Elise's wedding plans, raving about the venue, the dress, the flowers, and everything. Meanwhile, if I tried to bring up my own engagement, the talk quickly shifted back to Elise, or died out completely. The final straw came at Elise's bridal shower, which my mother insisted I help prepare despite having no real say in any decisions. I was assigned menial jobs such as addressing invitations and picking up decorations. While my mother and Elise made all of the crucial decisions together, during the shower, my Aunt Helena inquired when Daniel and I planned to marry. "Oh, Clara's not ready for marriage yet," my mother said before I could respond. "She's still finding herself. Elise has always been more mature about these things." Elise simply smiled and said nothing, which made it worse than if she had been cruel. That night, I returned home to Daniel and cried for 3 hours. He held me while I complained about how my family treated me, making me feel invisible and unimportant. Daniel proposed something that would change everything. "What if we just did it?" he asked gently. "What if we got married without telling them?" I assumed he was joking. But the more we discussed it, the more intriguing the concept appeared. Why should we wait for my family's approval or permission? Why should our happiness be put on hold for Elise's perfect timeline? Over the next few weeks, we arranged our surprise wedding. We opted on a small ceremony at the botanical gardens across town, with only Daniel's parents, sister, my best friend from college, Julia, and her husband Martin as witnesses. Daniel's family was overjoyed and immediately accepted me as their own daughter. The contrast between their friendliness and my family's coldness was striking. We chose Amelia Novak, a local photographer who specializes in intimate weddings. The florist, an elderly woman named Ingrid who owned a tiny shop downtown, made the most gorgeous bouquet of white daisies and eucalyptus. My outfit came from a store that specialized in simple, exquisite gowns. It wasn't expensive or fancy, but when I wore it, I felt like the most beautiful lady in the world. The ceremony was held on a lovely Saturday morning, July 20th, exactly 2 months before Elise's wedding. Daniel's father, a retired clergyman, officiated. There wasn't a dry eye in the tiny gathering as Daniel and I exchanged vows we'd written together. His commitment was to love me precisely as I am, without ever attempting to modify or transform me into someone else's image of perfection. Mine promised to establish a life together, founded on mutual respect and real cooperation, rather than competitiveness or comparison. Following the ceremony, we had a short lunch at Daniel's favorite restaurant, an Italian establishment that had been family-owned for 3 generations. The owner, Enzo, had known Daniel since he was a child and insisted on making a special supper for us. We laughed, shared tales, and celebrated with folks who genuinely cared about our pleasure. Our honeymoon consisted of a week-long road trip to national parks in Utah and Colorado. No luxury resorts or exotic destinations, just the two of us touring lovely locations and enjoying our new marriage. It was flawless in every manner that counted. When we returned, we resolved to keep the marriage a secret until after Elise's wedding. We didn't want to cause trouble or give my parents reason to blame us for ruining Elise's special day. We moved in together, telling my folks we were simply taking the next step in our relationship. My parents scarcely noticed this milestone. Elise's wedding preparations accelerated as the date approached. My mother contacted me every day with details on dress fittings, meal tastings, and floral arrangements. She expected me to be accessible for any emergencies and breakdowns. Despite having no interest in my own life, I played along, all the time surreptitiously wearing my wedding ring on a chain beneath my clothes. The week leading up to Elise's wedding was quite stressful. My mother evolved into what I can only refer to as a wedding general. Barking orders to vendors, family members, and anybody within a 10-foot radius. She called me at 7 a.m., 3 days before the wedding, virtually hyperventilating because the florist had brought the wrong color of pink rose. "Clara, you need to drive to the flower shop right now and fix this," she told her. "Elise will have a breakdown if everything isn't perfect." I looked at Daniel, who was preparing breakfast for us before his shift at the hospital. He lifted his eyebrows sympathetically as I mouthed, "Flower emergency," at him. "Mom, I have to work today," I explained. "Can't you handle this yourself?" "I'm too busy with the caterer," she said. "Your sister's wedding is this weekend, Clara." This is important. The irony was not lost on me. Here I was, a married woman, going on errands for my sister's wedding while my own marriage remained hidden. I spent my lunch break traveling across town to dispute with a florist about the difference between blush pink and dusty roses, all while hiding my wedding ring under my work blouse. The rehearsal dinner was hosted at a high-end steakhouse downtown. I watched my parents fawn over Adiran's family, who were charming but clearly uncomfortable with my parents' extravagant display of wealth. Adiran's mother, Madeline, was a kindergarten teacher, while his father, Laurent, worked as an electrician. They were genuine, down-to-earth people who appeared perplexed by the crystal stemware and gold-plated charger plates that my mother insisted on. During supper, my father stepped up to speak about Elise and Adiran's love story. He spoke about how pleased he was of Elise for finding such a beautiful man, how Adiran was fortunate to marry into our family, and how this wedding represented all they had planned for their daughter. The speech lasted over 12 minutes and discussed Elise's accomplishments, beauty, flawless college grades, and successful marketing profession. When he concluded, numerous people turned to look at me, expecting me to deliver a speech as the maid of honor. But my father simply sat down, as if he'd said everything he wanted to say about his daughters. The moment went awkwardly until Adiran stepped up and thanked everyone for attending. Later that evening, Marianne Moreau approached me at cocktail hour. "Clara, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I feel like I've barely heard anything about you tonight. Daniel constantly mentions you when we see him at family gatherings, and he clearly adores you. I'd like to learn more about your career and interests." The kindness in her voice nearly moved me to tears. Here was a woman I had only met a few hours before, who seemed more interested in my life than my own parents had in months. We talked for 20 minutes about my job at the local library, my volunteer work with adult literacy initiatives, and my photography passion. She listened closely, asked insightful questions, and made me feel like my life was important. "Daniel is lucky to have found someone so passionate and caring," she stated warmly. "I can tell you two are very happy together." If only she knew how correct she was, and how lately we had formalized that bliss. The morning of Elise's wedding dawned bright and clear, which my mother interpreted as a personal message from the cosmos that everything would be wonderful. She had reserved a suite at the country club for the bridal party to prepare, replete with a professional beauty artist, hairstylist and photographer to document every detail of Elise's preparations. I arrived at 8 a.m. to find Elise already in full preparation mode, seated in a luxurious white robe while the makeup artist worked on her face. The room was alive with activity as bridesmaids chatted. My mother directed the photographer, and various vendors arrived and left with last-minute touches. "Clara, finally," my mother shouted when she spotted me. "The photographer wants some shots of you helping Elise with her jewelry. Can you put her necklace on her?" I obediently clasped Elise's diamond necklace, a family relic that had belonged to my grandmother. As I worked on the clasp, Elise drew my attention in the mirror. "You know, I always imagined we'd be doing this together someday," she replied quietly. getting ready for our weddings, helping each other with our dresses. For a brief time she sounded like the sister I remembered from childhood before competition and favoritism had distanced us so much. I almost told her about my own wedding, how lovely it had been to have my friend Amy assist me with my dress, and how we had laughed and cried together in the small bridal suite at the Botanical Gardens. But then my mother emerged with the photographer, posing us for a series of candid photos, and the moment vanished. The ceremony preparations were a masterclass in planned excellence. My mother had engaged Katerina Varga, a wedding coordinator who handled the timeline with military precision. Every bridesmaid knew just when to walk down the aisle, how slowly to proceed and where to stand. The guys had been instructed on their places and cues, even the flower girl and ring bearer had gone through several practice sessions. As we queued up outside the ceremonial area, I noticed Daniel in his seat. He looked dashing in his navy suit, and when our gazes connected, he grinned and patted his chest, where I knew he wore his wedding ring on a chain like I did. That tiny gesture reminded me that I was not alone in my performance, and that I had, if you appreciate extravagant, someone who genuinely loved and supported me. Productions. The wedding ceremony was definitely beautiful. The setting was an elite country club, complete with cascading white flowers, sparkling chandeliers, and enough champagne to float a boat. Elise looked gorgeous in her couture gown, and Adiran was dashing in his Cuss Martin tuxedo. The guest list contained over 215 people, the majority of whom were significant for networking or social status, but knew little about the newlyweds. I acted as a bridesmaid, wearing a pale pink gown that cost more than my complete wedding attire. Throughout the ceremony, I couldn't help but compare it to my own. Elise's was intricate and stunning, but mine was infused with love and genuine feeling. I knew exactly which one I favored. If you appreciate extravagant productions, the event was definitely gorgeous. The processional alone lasted about 15 minutes, with each bridesmaid strolling down the petal-strewn aisle at the rate of a funeral march. The officiant, a family friend who had known Elise since infancy, delivered a lengthy sermon on marriage that felt more like a show for the audience than a spiritual exchange between two people in love. During the vows, Elise and Adiran delivered lines they wrote jointly with the assistance of a professional wedding speechwriter. They were refined and romantic, with parallels to fate and fairy tales. As I stood behind Elise, clutching her bouquet, I couldn't help but recall my own vows to Daniel, fumbling over words as I attempted to articulate emotions too large for words. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I swore to love him no matter what life brought us. The banquet that followed was far more extravagant than the wedding. The country club's ballroom had been turned into what my mother described as a romantic garden. Paradise, complete with hundreds of roses, fairy lights, and enough candles to light up a small city. Each table was set with gold-rimmed china, crystal glasses, and centerpieces that likely cost more than the average person's monthly rent. I sat at the head table with Elise's college roommate, Camille, and our cousin Isabel, who spent the entire cocktail hour talking about their respective relationship dramas. Camille was in the midst of a nasty divorce from her 3-year-old husband, and Isabel was dating a chef whom her parents disapproved of since he was not a lawyer or doctor. "At least you don't have to worry about any of that yet," Isabel told me during the salad course. "You're smart to take your time and really figure out what you want before settling down." I nearly choked on my wine. If only she knew I'd already decided what I wanted and married him 2 months ago in a ceremony that felt more genuine than this entire charade. The dinner service lasted more than 2 hours, with several courses and wine pairings that the sommelier explained in great detail. My parents went all out, hiring a 5-star catering business that specialized in premium dining experiences. The food was undeniably delicious, but it reminded me of the simple Italian lunch Daniel and I had after our wedding ceremony, when Enzo served us his grandmother's recipe for osobo and refused to let us pay because love should be celebrated with the best food and the biggest hearts. Throughout the lunch, several family members and guests came up to make toasts. Elise's college buddies told her humorous stories about her dating experiences before Adiran. Adiran's best man described their bond from infancy. My uncle André shared embarrassing anecdotes about Elise as a child, which made everyone chuckle. Even Adiran's bashful younger brother delivered a nice speech about becoming a sister. When it was time for the traditional maid of honor speech, I stood up, holding my champagne glass and feeling the weight of my hidden wedding ring against my chest. I had spent days composing and revising this speech, attempting to find words that were honest without being harsh, loving without being phony. Elise has always been the type of person who knows what she wants and pursues it, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. She's never been afraid to dream big or to work hard to make those dreams come true. Adiran, you're getting someone who will challenge you. To be your best self while loving you exactly as you are. And Elise, you found someone who sees all the wonderful things about you that the rest of us have always known were there. This was true. Even though our relationship was complex, Elise was determined and ambitious, which I loved, even if they eclipsed my own softer attributes. The toast was well received, and Elise said thank you to me as I sat down. The dancing began after supper, with Elise and Adiran performing their first dance to Etta Laurent's at last. They danced flawlessly together, having spent months practicing their routine. My parents watched from their table, tears in their eyes, and I could see my mother arranging the picture album page for this time. As the evening progressed, I found myself viewing the entire ceremony with the detached perspective of an anthropological researching wedding rites. The cake-cutting ceremony, in which Elise and Adiran fed each other little bits as the photographer recorded every perspective. The bouquet and garter toss rituals appeared to be meant for fun, rather than romantic value. Endless photo sessions with various combinations of family and friends. What struck me most was how staged everything felt. Don't get me wrong, Elise and Adiran were definitely in love and joyful, but the wedding appeared to be more about putting on a show for the guests than about celebrating their commitment to each other. Every moment was scripted, and every element was carefully planned to maximize visual impact. I thought of my own wedding day. Daniel and I had spent the morning meandering through the botanical gardens before our wedding, silently discussing our goals for our marriage. We wrote our vows independently, and shocked each other with heartfelt remarks. Daniel's 8-year-old nephew acted as our ring bearer and was whispering loudly about how beautiful my outfit was throughout the ceremony. Our photographer, Amelia, captured stunning moments that were unstaged and authentic. Daniel wiping tears from my eyes during our vows, and I laughed as his father stuttered over the wording of the ceremony. The unexpected group hug that occurred after we were declared husband and wife. These were not moments intended for social media or family photo albums. They were genuine sentiments shared by people who cared about one another. Around 10 p.m., the party was fully underway. The band my parents had hired played a combination of old love songs and contemporary favorites, which kept the dance floor full. Elise had changed from her ceremony gown to a shorter, more comfortable celebration gown, making it simpler to dance. She looked radiant and delighted as she spun around the dance floor with Adiran, then my father, and finally with different family members and friends. I did a couple necessary dances with relatives and family acquaintances, chatting about my career and my relationship with Daniel. Everyone appeared to expect we'd be engaged soon, and I smiled non-committally while my wedding ring pressed against my chest like a secret about to be revealed. Daniel and I were able to steal a few dances together, including a slow song where he murmured in my ear, "How are you holding up, Mrs. Moreau?" Hearing him address me by my married name in the middle of my sister's wedding celebration was weird and wonderful. "Just a few more hours," I said quietly back. "Then we can go home, and I can wear my ring where it belongs." The worst part of the evening was watching my parents. They were in their element, clearly enjoying their role as proud hosts. My mother had changed into 3 different clothes throughout the day, each more ornate than the previous one. My father had relaxed after a few glasses of champagne and was telling anybody who would listen how proud he was of Elise and how fortunate Adiran was to join their family. In a quiet time, I overheard my mother speak to her sister Helena about Elise's future intentions. "They're thinking about starting a family in a year or 2, she continued, her voice filled with excitement. "Can you imagine how beautiful their children will be? And Adiran has such good family genes, smart, successful, handsome." I wondered if my mother would ever talk about my future children with the same excitement, or if they would always come second to Elise's children and her adoration. The notion made my chest tighten with a familiar combination of sadness and rage. As the evening progressed, I began to feel a peculiar sense of anticipation grow within me. I knew that in a few hours I'd be able to share my own news with this room full of people who had previously dismissed me as Elise's less fascinating younger sister. The thought was both horrifying and exciting. Around 11:30, Elise announced that it was time to toss the bouquet. All of the unmarried women were asked to assemble on the dance floor, and I unwillingly joined them. I was dreading this moment because I knew my mother would make comments about when it was my turn to grab the bouquet and find my own pleasure. The other unmarried women in the group included Elise's teenage cousins, as well as some of her college pals who were still negotiating the dating scene in their late 20s. They talked excitedly about the custom, with some joking about not wanting to be next, and others clearly hoping to catch the flowers. Elise stood with her back to us, carrying an ornate bouquet designed expressly for tossing, a miniature replica of her bridal bouquet comprised of white roses, baby's breath, and trailing ribbons. The photographer and cameraman positioned themselves to catch the scene from different perspectives. "Are you ready, ladies?" Elise exclaimed, lifting the bouquet above her head. The women crouched slightly, arms spread, preparing to compete for the symbolic flowers. I stood in the back, not especially interested in taking part in what appeared to be a desperate performance. But, as Elise prepared to throw the bouquet, I couldn't help but think about how ironic the situation was. I was pretending to be single and looking for love, but I was already married to the most wonderful man in the room. The flowers flew through the air in a perfect arc and landed just in my palms, in what could only be described as cosmic irony. The audience exploded in cheers and clapping, with someone shouting, "Clara's next." I stood there, holding the bouquet, feeling the weight of the occasion settle about me. This was it. The scenario for which I had been unconsciously waiting all evening. My mother appeared at my side, her face flushed with booze and excitement. "Your sister's wedding was perfect," Mom smiled, her voice reaching across the hushed room. "When will it be your turn?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I gave Daniel, who was standing near the bar, an encouraging smile. I took a deep breath, reached into the small secret pocket in my bridesmaid dress that I had particularly chosen, and pulled out my wedding ring, which I slipped onto my finger. "It already happened, you just weren't there." The entire room froze. My mother's smile wavered and confusion replaced her previous excitement. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I held up my hand, displaying the wedding band that now proudly adorned my finger. "Daniel and I got married on April 13th. We had a beautiful ceremony at the Botanical Gardens with people who actually care about us." The silence was terrible. Elise's mouth dropped open, still holding her empty hands where the bouquet had been. My father's face changed color numerous times before finally resting on an angry red. Other guests began muttering amongst themselves, and phones appeared as people attempted to digest the sudden drama. "You're joking," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not at all," I said, surprising myself with my cool tone. "We have photos, a marriage certificate, everything." It was a lovely ceremony, small but meaningful, the kind of wedding two people have when they're focused on marriage rather than a party. Elise has finally found her voice. "Why didn't you tell us? Why would you do this?" I turned to face my sister, who had unintentionally been the center of my family's universe for the last 28 years. "When exactly should I have told you? During one of your dress fittings that I wasn't invited to? At your bridal shower, where Mom told everyone I wasn't ready for marriage? Or maybe during one of the dozens of family dinners where every conversation was about your perfect relationship and your perfect wedding plans?" My mother looked distraught. "Clara, we wanted to be there for you." "Did you though?" I inquired, my voice growing stronger. "Because I've been trying to share my life with this family for years, and there's never been room for anyone except Elise. When I got engaged, Dad told me to wait until after Elise's wedding because we didn't want to steal her thunder. When I mentioned wedding ideas, you changed the subject. When I tried to talk about Daniel, you gave me lectures about focusing on my career instead." The audience was obviously paying attention now, even though most of them were pretending to look at their phones or the centerpieces. Adarin had moved to Elise's side, appearing uneasy and puzzled. My father took a step forward, his voice tight with repressed wrath. "This is hardly the time or place for this discussion, Clara." "Isn't it though?" I answered. "This is a celebration of marriage and family, right? I'm just sharing my happy news with everyone. Unless of course you're embarrassed that your younger daughter got married without needing a $50,000 party to prove it." That struck home. My father clenched his teeth and my mother appeared to be about to cry. Daniel approached and took my hand. "Maybe we should go," he said quietly. "Good idea," I agreed. I returned to the room, where many people were still staring. "Thank you all for helping us celebrate. It's been enlightening." The consequences of my admission were swift and dramatic. The room, which had been filled with joy and laughing just moments before, sank into the kind of silence found only in libraries and funeral homes. I could see people absorbing what I had said. Some were perplexed, others stunned, and a few were plainly excited by the unexpected drama. Elise's face changed numerous times in quick succession: astonishment, incredulity, hurt, and eventually rage. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" she shouted, her voice low but audible in the quiet room. "At my wedding?" "I'm just answering Mom's question," I said, shocked by my cool demeanor. My heart was beating, but I felt calmer than I had all day. She asked when it would be my turn, and I told her the truth. My father stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled rage. Clara, this is completely inappropriate. We need to discuss this privately. Why? I questioned. This is a celebration of marriage and family, isn't it? I thought you'd be happy to learn that I'm married to a wonderful man who loves me unconditionally. The final section was addressed squarely at my parents, and their emotions indicated that it hit home. Around us I noticed people pulling out their phones, some possibly texting other family members, some likely filming the drama for social media. My mother looked like she was going to get sick. Clara, honey, you can't be serious. When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us? I told you. I responded, my voice growing stronger. You just weren't there. We got married on April 15th at the Botanical Gardens. It was a beautiful ceremony with people who actually wanted to celebrate our happiness. Daniel appeared by my side, giving me the courage to continue. My husband Daniel and I decided to have a small, intimate wedding, focused on our commitment to each other, rather than impressing a bunch of people who barely know us. The word husband struck my family like a physical blow. Elise took a step back, almost falling over her intricate train. You've been lying to us for months, my father exclaimed, his voice taut with rage. How could you deceive your family like this? Deceive you? I laughed, my voice harsh in the quiet room. Like when you told Aunt Helena that I wasn't ready for marriage at Elise's bridal shower. Or when you suggested I wait to get engaged so I wouldn't steal Elise's thunder. When exactly was I supposed to share my news with a family that made it clear my life wasn't as important as my sister's? More phones appeared throughout the room. I could see my cousin Sophie filming everything, most likely for the family members who were not present. My uncle André appeared to be divided between intervening and enjoying the drama. Elise found her voice again. So what? You decided to ruin my wedding because you're jealous? Because you couldn't stand having one day not be about you? That stung, but I was not going to back down. This isn't about you, Elise. This is about me finally standing up for myself after 24 years of being treated like the consolation prize daughter. That's not fair, my mother cried, tears streaming down her neatly made-up cheeks. We love you both equally. Do you? I challenged. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When did you last ask about my job, my hobbies, my relationship, without immediately changing the subject to Elise? When did you last act like my happiness mattered as much as hers? The hush that ensued was deafening. Around us, the wedding guests had formed a wide circle, some appearing to look aside while clearly listening to everything. The band had stopped playing, and the waitstaff had ceased their work to observe the growing family drama. Adiran, who had stood motionless behind Elise, eventually said something. Maybe we should take this conversation somewhere private. Why? I questioned. So you can all gang up on me and tell me how selfish I'm being? So you can make me feel guilty for finally speaking up about how I've been treated? I don't think so. I turned to address the entire room, feeling both reckless and emancipated. I want everyone to know that Daniel and I had a beautiful wedding ceremony 2 months ago. We exchanged vows we wrote ourselves, surrounded by people who love and support us. It was small but perfect, and I wouldn't change a single thing about it. Some of the elder guests appeared scandalized, but I noted that several of the younger family members were nodding in agreement. My cousin Sophie had stopped recording and was now smiling at me. Even several of Elise's friends seemed pleased by my bravery. Daniel squeezed my hand. Clara, maybe we should go home now, he said quietly. I nodded, suddenly fatigued from the confrontation. The adrenaline that had gotten me through my epiphany was fading, and I noticed I was trembling slightly. Congratulations on a beautiful wedding, Elise, I remarked, my voice softening. I hope you and Adiran have a wonderful marriage. I really do. Elise looked at me for a long time, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I can't believe you did this, she muttered. I can't believe it took me this long, I said. As Daniel and I went toward the exit, I could hear murmuring starting behind us, voices increasing as people tried to understand what had happened. My phone was already full of text messages and missed calls. How do you feel? Daniel inquired as we approached his car. I considered it for a moment, taking long breaths of the cool evening air. Free, I finally replied. Scared, but free. The journey home was silent as we both reflected on what had just happened. I kept replaying the event in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently, if there had been a better way to make my point. But then I remembered my mother's expression, when she inquired about my turn, implying that I was still waiting for my life to begin, while Elise lived her wonderful fairy tale. I recalled all the years of feeling invisible, all the times my accomplishments had been neglected or reduced. Perhaps my approach wasn't flawless, but it was honest. When we came home, I finally took the ring off the chain where I had hidden it and confirmed that it was back on my finger. Daniel did the same, and we finally looked like a married couple after 2 months. "No more hiding," I remarked, admiring how the ring reflected the light. "No more hiding," Daniel agreed, taking me into his arms. "Though I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be interesting." He was correct. My phone rang non-stop for the next 3 days, with calls from family members, friends, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years who had learned about the drama through the extended family network. Some were encouraging, others were critical, and a few were simply looking for gossip. The most distressing phone calls came from my own family. My mother left 21 voicemails, her tone ranging from heartfelt apologies to angry accusations. Elise sent a series of text messages that became increasingly nasty, as I didn't react right away. My father, as is customary, did not contact me personally, instead relaying his displeasure with my attention-seeking behavior to my mother. However, there were some favorable answers. My Aunt Helena called to congratulate me and say how proud she was of me for sticking up for myself. Several cousins contacted me to say they'd always observed a difference in how my parents handled Elise and me. Even some of Elise's friends wrote me to tell they thought what I did was courageous. The most unexpected support came from Daniel's relatives. When they found out what had happened at the reception, they were shocked by how my family had treated me throughout the years. Helen Moreau called to apologize for not understanding how terrible things were for me and to invite me to their family gatherings whenever I wanted someone to admire me. "You're our daughter now too," she added warmly. "And we're so glad Daniel found someone as strong and wonderful as you." 3 weeks after Elise's wedding, my parents requested to meet with Daniel and me. We arranged to have supper at a neutral restaurant, rather than cope with the emotional weight of meeting at their home. The chat seemed awkward and painful. My mother cried several times, claiming she had no clue I felt so isolated from the family. My father maintained that I handled the incident horribly, embarrassing everyone involved. Neither of them seemed to understand why I felt I needed to keep my wedding a secret. "We just wanted Elise to have a perfect day," my mother said again. "And what about my perfect day?" I finally inquired. "Did it ever occur to either of you that I might want a family who cared about my happiness too?" The evening concluded without a resolution, although my parents did ask to see our wedding photos. I showed them a few photos from my phone, observing their reactions as they realized how happy and radiant I looked surrounded by people who loved me. 6 months later, my connection with my family is still problematic. My mother makes more of an attempt to engage me in family interactions, but she still focuses mostly on Elise. My father speaks to me politely but without warmth. Elise and I have an uneasy truce. But we've never been very close, and this scenario hasn't changed that. The extended family has mainly moved on, but I still get comments at gatherings about my surprise wedding. Some relatives regard what I did as petty and dramatic, while others say it was long overdue. I've learnt not to be overly concerned with their opinions. Daniel and I are as happy as ever. We purchased a little house with a garden and now hold dinner parties for people who feel like chosen family. We've discussed having children, and I'm glad they'll grow up knowing they're wanted and valued for who they are. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled things differently, if there was another way to make my point without causing such a public scene. But then I remember all the years when I felt invisible and unimportant, when my sentiments were disregarded or neglected. Perhaps my approach was imperfect, but it was honest. My family spent years telling me that I didn't matter as much as Elise, that my accomplishments were less important, and that my pleasure came second to sustaining their image of the perfect family. They created the circumstance in which I felt compelled to conceal such a significant milestone. The truth is that I do not regret my secret wedding. It was wonderful and meaningful to be surrounded by people who truly cared about Daniel and myself as individuals. I had no regrets about revealing it during Elise's reception. After 28 years of being viewed as the less important daughter, I finally discovered my voice. When people ask about my family situation, I honestly tell them that we are working on it. Some relationships can be mended, while others simply need to be redefined. I'm realizing that I can't control how my parents perceive me, but I can manage how much influence their opinions have over my life. Daniel and I are already developing our own family customs, based on mutual respect and true love rather than favoritism and rivalry. We organize holidays for friends who do not have family nearby, volunteer at the children's hospital, and make decisions as equal partners. The best retribution, I've discovered, isn't necessarily the dramatic moment of revelation. Sometimes it's about creating a life so good that you don't need anyone else's approval to justify it. But I have to confess, seeing the surprised expressions in that reception hall was really satisfying. My wedding ring is no longer concealed on the chain, but now sits proudly on my finger. It isn't as expensive or elaborate as Elise's, but it represents something more valuable. A marriage founded on love, respect, and the realization that I am enough just the way I am. And this, more than any retribution plot, is the true win.